So I've been experimenting with these aftermarket Argo bearings. They're not made by Argo, they're somebody else. The Argo bearings are about $50 a piece, and these aftermarket bearings are about $10 a piece. And so they have the same diameter this way, but they're just a hair narrower this way, and they fit in just fine. I have 3 of these on my machine now, and I'll see over time if it's really worth the savings. It may or may not be. We'll see. So I have 2 different kinds of bearings on here. This is an aftermarket bearing, and the way I can tell it's an aftermarket bearing is it has a collar on right here, and on that collar you can see right here there's a set screw. And so on the aftermarket bearings you have to put them on really the opposite way you'd like to put them on, and I'll show you why in this video. And there's a process to do it correctly, and I'll show you that in the video as well. And so on this Argo right now, I have an aftermarket bearing there. The next bearing back, see there is no collar on the outside. That is an Argo bearing. The next one back here has a collar on it. That is an aftermarket bearing. And then the very back one here is an Argo bearing. Let's take a closer look at these 2 bearings. So this is the aftermarket bearing, and this is the Argo bearing. And you can see, when you look at it this way here, that Argo bearing, the surface, this surface right here is nearly the same on both of them, at least size-wise. You can see they both have kind of a deflector here that'll help keep weeds and junk out of there, but also help keep grease in the bearing. One of the differences in the 2 that really bother me is, so this is a grease port on this bearing, and this is a grease port on this bearing, but this one also has, there we go, it's got a grease port here and here, so you could put this bearing on either way and have access to that grease port. When you put the bearings on, when you put it on this way here, the nipple is on the outside of the machine. And so to put this on and access the outside of the machine, you have to put this on basically backwards so the collar's on the outside of the machine. Where with the Argo bearing, you could put it on this way so the collar is on the inside of the machine and still have a grease port that you could have on the outside of the machine so the Zerk would access that. So if in this video you'll see more about that. And it looks, let's tip them up this way. See, it looks like the 2 surface areas that actually come in contact are the exact same. The diameter of the bearing is the exact same. And if you Google this number right here, you're going to be able to find multiple bearings, including this bearing here. And so that's kind of the difference in the 2 bearings, and the reason that you have to put this aftermarket one on really, I would say backwards, or the opposite way you'd like to, is because of the grease port thing. I wonder, but I haven't been gutsy enough to do this, if you could drill your own hole in here. I think if you did that, though, you get some metal filings inside the bearing, and that would not be good. And so that's a closer look at the Argo bearing and the aftermarket bearing. Okay, this aftermarket bearing has a locator button right here that needs to be ground off. The other thing we're going to find out about this aftermarket bearing is the only grease ports as we turn it. This is a grease port and this is a grease port here. As we turn it around, there's no grease ports on the other side of this bearing, which means that we have to put it with a set screws on the outside where they can get to the water and whatnot, but that's what you got to do. So we're going to go ahead and put that on backwards, and then we'll end up grinding a flat spot in the shaft so this can tighten down against it. Okay, so you can see I have this pushed all the way in as far as it's supposed to go. The bearing's where it's supposed to go, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a mark right here on the shaft. So once I pull it out, I'll know where the bearing goes, and then I'll grind a little flat spot for the set screws. As I've marked 2 places on here where I'm just going to grind a little flat spot, kind of like here where they did the original ones. Okay, you can see that I've ground 2 flat spots that'll match this bearing when it goes on, and it'll actually go on this way because remember we got the grease port has to be on the outside so that it fits into the grease nipple there. So time will tell if putting these aftermarket bearings on was a smart idea or not. I personally don't like having the collar on the outside because the set screws are going to be exposed to the elements, and I anticipate that we'll have some rust and some issues with that. In fact, I'm positive we will. And so that's the downside for me. These aftermarket bearings are a good quality bearing though, and so it'll be interesting to see how they hold up over time. So stay tuned, and I'll share more information as we go on. Thanks for watching this video today.